Story 1. Okay, anecdotal evidence I understand, but it is what it is. I started seeing a lovely young Irish lass when I was young. She came from a modest financial background. Whenever we went out, I paid for everything. We went to places I could afford, but it was all on me, my choice. If we used her car, I would fill it with gas. As it turned out, she married me and gave me 3 wonderful children, all of whom have now left the nest and are financially independent. Side note, when her parents passed, they left us around $1.8 million. So you just never know. Story 2. Just wait until the right one becomes your wife. And then when you have kids, along the way, there may also be buying and maintaining a home, trying to afford everything and saving for retirement, general inflation, economic crises that hit your finances, unexpected emergencies, and so on. Never ends. Then you'll hit middle age and older and tell your kids and grandkids how much cheaper everything was when you were younger, and they will give you that okay boomer, barely polite smile. But enjoy dating and your youth while you can. Story 3. Because couples like to do things together. Even if you are splitting literally everything, you would still be paying for going out on dates or for meals way more often than you would if you were not dating. Unless you literally spend all your time at home together, it will be a decent increase in your normal expenditure. Story 4. I did not have that experience. I specifically went for equally career-minded and financially independent women. My wife and I make similar incomes and have been financially equal ever since splitting the tab on our very first date. I did not waste my time on any broke or high-maintenance women. I wanted a partner, not a liability. Story 5. My boyfriend was trying to save money, so instead of going out to brunches and dinners, he started doing surprise dates with great homemade meals. I loved it. He switched it up between breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He has taken an interest in cookbooks. Story 6. I dated a guy for a year before we got married. He took me to shows and fancy dinners, insisting on paying, which was fun, but I never asked for any of it. After we got married, he told me he had spent years building that savings, and now it was all gone. I had no idea. I am a homebody, and I also had a decent job at the time and would have split everything. If having a girlfriend is so expensive, you either need to find a different girl or act like an adult in an adult relationship and talk to her about it. Story 7. Dated my wife for 6 years and then married for 36 years. She was and always has been quick on the draw with her wallet. Women I dated before that were always saying, "Buy me, buy me, buy me." Forget that. It should be voluntary. Story 8. It doesn't have to be. If you and your girlfriend both work, live together, and share expenses, you'll save money compared to being single. If you date people who expect you to pay for everything, yes, that will be expensive. Story 9. If you refer to the fact that you tend to enjoy more activities together that cost money as opposed to doing things alone and that you sometimes buy things for each other, that's just how it is. If you think that a woman by your side is expensive or that you're being used for your money, maybe rethink your opinion on women in general. Every person is entirely different. Don't let yourself be used by the few people who do or think that it's a problem you'll always face. Story 10. It's not in my case. My girlfriend and I, who have been together for nearly 10 years, split bills pretty evenly from our first date. Now we use a joint account. I've treated her before, she's treated me before, and we've never worried about who owes whom what. Story 11. It's not so much that having a girlfriend has become expensive as it is that the mere act of living has become more costly due to corporate greed and inflation. When you consider this for 2 people, expenses rise even more. Story 12. Because we feel like, as men, we have to pay for everything. If we go to eat, we pay. Do an activity, we pay. Go on a trip, we feel like we should pay for most things on the trip. Depending on the situation, it can be the woman's fault a man feels like this, or it could be entirely the man's fault he feels like this. When I was in high school, my girlfriend at the time didn't work, and I did, so I would pay for everything. Also because I loved her. She finally got a job, and not too long after, we went to grab lunch. I wasn't necessarily expecting her to pay, but I wasn't fully expecting myself to have to either. The cashier told us our total, and I looked at my girlfriend, and she said, "Well, pay." I'm not going to. I could write her attitude off as being young and dumb, but now that I'm older and with my current girlfriend, She'll text me and say, "Hey, I'm coming over and I'm going to buy you pizza or ice cream." It mainly depends on the people involved in the relationship. Story 13. Went to 5 dates recently in hopes of getting a new girlfriend. I never offered to pay once, even though I'm financially successful, but as the bill comes, they expect me to move my wallet, and so I do by sheer pressure. Haven't gotten any thank you or anything of the sort. Since then, I stopped dating, and I'm just contemplating living alone for the rest of my life. Story 14. If it's the right girl, though, it's worth it. But my girlfriend and I had a money talk very early on when we started dating. She even brought it up first after we had lunch one day and flat out said, "You don't always have to pay for everything. I can pay for us too, or sometimes we can even pay separately." And she was true to her word. Sometimes I paid, sometimes she paid, and sometimes we split it. And when we'd go shopping, we would often pay for our stuff separately, but of course, sometimes we paid for each other's stuff too. Story 15. We raise these people, telling them they are princesses, the most beautiful, the most amazing. "Don't worry, I will take care of you. I will protect you." Then, 80% of all people are out of shape, so the remaining 20% are not only royalty, their slight perception of health has gained them massive power. It's crazy. Story 16. She eats a lot and wants things. If you were a good boyfriend, you would get her a nice gift on her birthday, Valentine's Day, and your anniversary, which is just easier to buy something or take her out. Sometimes you want to be spontaneous and buy her flowers or chocolates. Sometimes you have to buy her tampons, emergency contraception, condoms, or other things related to intimacy. If you're traditional, going 50-50ths on things is odd. Any activity you do with her would cost money too. Whether it's going to the gym, dates, or watching movies. It all costs money. You could argue that you can do things without spending money. However, eventually, they're just draining your wallet. I really doubt they'll stay without you spending a little bit unless you're really good at expressing yourself without spending your money. Hats off to you. I'm not complaining about having a girlfriend. It's just realistic, to be honest. Story 17. Because most single men don't do anything fancy. They barely eat out, and they rarely do activities that would cost them money. Add a girl to the equation, and you start to do things you don't normally do. Story 18. Because you date women who believe in practices and traditions that will push you to pay more than her just because you are a man. Find a sugar mama, or someone who believes in a 50-50 relationship. Story 19. That's to prepare you for the cost of having a wife and kids. If you think having a girlfriend is expensive, you might want to avoid dating until you are better established. Story 20. Because you make it expensive. It doesn't have to be. It depends on what you enjoy doing together. A walk in the park isn't expensive. Brunches and nightclubs are expensive. Story 21. During the honeymoon phase, sure, you have to invite her out. After that, I enjoy telling her to sit down and start on a nice bottle of wine while I cook an elaborate meal. That's just my love language. I enjoy cooking. It's vastly cheaper than going out, and I actually enjoy cooking. Story 22. Having a girlfriend actually saves me money in some ways, especially when she has been successful. We share bills, she pays for groceries half the time, and she does about half the domestic tasks, meaning I can work a little more overtime. Now, is it always the case? No. When she was unemployed, she was a financial strain, and she was feeling down and not helpful domestically. But we had a serious conversation about that, and it won't be happening again. Story 23. Because you can't reason with them about expenses. Even from the whole who pays for the first date debate, which is discussed endlessly, they still can't admit that it's unfair to men to pay for dates, and they argue with you persistently to maintain their advantage in the dating scene. What makes it worse are the men who continue to entertain this delusion. I have heard every single reason why women still believe men should pay for dates, and none of them make sense. It's manipulation in its purest form, but they will keep fighting for it because it advantages them, and they have no interest in actual equality. Story 24. If it's expensive, then they are the wrong person. A coffee date or walk should suffice for a first date. It is also a red flag if your girlfriend expects you to pay every time as well. Story 25. They are not. You are just unlucky to have met some who were after your money. But indeed, doing activities with friends costs money. The same applies if that person is also your significant other. Story 26. Thought about getting back into dating. Got to pretend to be a human again and go eat out uncomfortably at bad restaurants and get robbed for crappy food. I don't even want to pay for dating apps. 78 blurry photos want to meet me. Cool. Well, I feel wanted and better. I'm good again. It's the chase that brings thrills. The rest is work. Story 27. As Louis Rossmann puts it, there is a group of women who think a woman's time on a date is the equivalent of the man's time plus a quantity of money. This is in response to a woman saying she would not feel safe going on a date where the guy did not pick up the entire check, actually phrasing it as a safety issue. Story 28. Settle in, boys and girls, this is going to be a long one. Most of my girlfriends were not that expensive. Or maybe it just seemed that way because I didn't have much money to begin with, so we didn't do much. But my wife, oh my wife, she was expensive even when she was just my girlfriend. She spent so much of my money that I was forced to declare bankruptcy. But we got past that. I urged her to control her spending, and she did for a while. But after a few years, it was right back to the bad old ways. She got into deep credit card debt. So, I had to pull money out of my 401k to pay it off. We were looking to buy a house, so we couldn't have that kind of debt hanging over us and driving our credit rating down. So I paid it off. Once again, all good for a very little while. Then, she misunderstood her employment status. She was an independent contractor, not an employee. So all the taxes that would have been taken out of her check as an employee were not. Come tax time, she owed a significant amount of money. The old saying is you'd rather owe money to the mafia than the Internal Revenue Service, and it's no joke. My mother knowingly signed a bogus Internal Revenue Service tax return. My father forced her to do it. He'd have beaten her if she didn't. The problem was she was gainfully employed by the same company for over 30 years, while my father would work for a year, then get fired for his drinking and start up at another company. I don't know what kind of tricks he used to avoid getting his wages garnished, but it worked. My mother, on the other hand, was a sitting target. The Internal Revenue Service went after my mother. She had her wages garnished for decades. It really crippled her financially. When I found out my fiancé, yeah, she had upgraded at this point, was in debt to the Internal Revenue Service, I once again dipped into my 401k and paid it off. That scared her straight for a while. We managed to get our credit in good shape, got a mortgage, for which I provided the entire down payment by yet again dipping into my 401k, and bought a house. Then, since she didn't like our kitchen, she decided to forge my name on a home equity loan to get money to fix the kitchen to her liking. I didn't know this and wouldn't find out for some years. She told me she had inherited the money when her father died. But we also refinanced the house at a lower interest rate shortly thereafter, so that home interest loan debt got lumped into the refinancing. At least we got some value out of the new kitchen. We paid the mortgage for about 10 years. At which point she decided she could do better if she just married a doctor. She was a registered nurse. So, she found a needy little sap. She described him as a cross between Rick Moranis and Woody Allen, but without all the machismo that she could seduce. She cheated on me, stole a bunch of stuff from the house, and when I questioned where it had gone, told me it had been sold at a yard sale. It hadn't. She had just moved it into the new house she was sharing with the doctor. All of her shenanigans ultimately came back to bite her because she really wasn't clever enough to hide her tracks well. Once I got suspicious about this, it was pretty easy to track it all down, get documented proof, and confront her with it all in court, after she had denied all of it. That was a very satisfying moment. Anyway, in the end, she had to pay me back a bunch of money for the debt I had paid off for her. What I really wanted was half of the down payment for the house back. But my lawyer couldn't wrangle that. Because of her cheating and the ensuing divorce, we had to sell the house for fair market value as part of the divorce agreement. The problem was that the market had bottomed out. We bought the house for $298,000 and added $30,000 in debt via the home equity loan and paid about $2,500 a month for 10 years in mortgage payments. Fair market value for the house turned out to be $175,000. Fortunately, the mortgage company took that as payment in full for the outstanding debt. and I was free and clear without any hit to my credit or any further debt. But I did not make a single dime on the sale of the house. On the other hand, when we separated our finances during the divorce, I suddenly had an extra $1,000 to $1,200 every month. During the course of our entire relationship, she had spent all her money and as much of mine as she could get her hands on. That extra money I had every month represented that. I took this money and hid it in a safe, which in turn I hid in the deepest depths of a locked closet in a locked room to which she had no access. By the time the divorce was final, I had amassed over $30,000. That, plus the $10,000 she had to pay me back, made a nice little nest egg. She also had to pay half the mortgage, utilities, and other household expenses until the house sold, which it didn't for almost 3 years after the divorce was final. She had the audacity to ask, via my pseudo-mother-in-law, a woman whom I held in the highest esteem, if I could see it in my heart to let her out of having to pay half the mortgage, utilities, and other household expenses because she was also paying rent for the house she was sharing with her Dr. Buddy. I was not sympathetic to her plight and laughed and laughed. Anyway, the point to this whole situation is don't get married. Don't share any finances with anyone. Don't give anyone access to your finances. Guard your financial security like your Ebenezer Scrooge before the ghostly visits. This doesn't mean you should be a miser or be cheap. Just take care of yourself. So, to answer your original question as best I can, why are girlfriends so expensive? Because they can see your income as a supplement to their own and thus a boost to their expendable income. Thus, they spend it. They get nice things, nice clothes, get their hair and nails done, have a nice spa day with the girls. I try to calculate what my wife ultimately cost me. Not the gifts and dinners and things like that, but the paid-off debts, the money I could have and would have made on the house if she had not timed her infidelity so terribly. Most of that money would have gone in my 401k where it would have sat untouched for decades. I could have retired a wealthy man. I did all right, but I could have been so much better off. The house? Not long after we bought, it appraised for $450,000. We could have sold then and made a nice profit, which we could then have turned over into another house. But no. $40,000 for the down payment, $1,250, my half of the mortgage for 10 years, and who knows how much money lost if I'd have been able to ride out the dip in the real estate market and waited until it recovered before we sold the house. Even if it only recovered to the point where it appraised for $450,000, it would have been a nice chunk of money. There is a house on the same street currently available at $589,000. I have to think my house would be worth more, since I had a small river backing up against my backyard and an undevelopable lot on one side. The different what-ifs are staggering. Fall in love all you want, but don't ever be fooled into thinking that you and she have the same goals and that you are anything other than a provider of comfort for her.